Every time I share my story, it's still kind of fresh for me. But I look back and can't help but praise God for what He's done in my life and what He continues to do for my life. Both my parents are from the island of Samoa. And they came over to New Zealand in the 70s when the factories had opened up in Auckland, New Zealand. And many Pacific Islanders were going over to New Zealand. My mother remembers the newspaper article that went out to the islands, and that newspaper article said, "Come to the land flowing with milk and honey." A lot of Pacific Islanders went over to New Zealand. My parents, though, my mother was young when she went to New Zealand. She was told to go to New Zealand because her parents were trying to separate her from my dad when they were dating. And my father's side of the family were not so religious, but my mother's family were devout Christians. And my mother's mother, she would say to my mother, "How can two walk together if they don't agree?" And so she would try and convince my mother to date somebody or see somebody that was in the church, and not to marry anybody outside of the church because it'll make things complicated for you. And my mother wouldn't realize that reality until many years later. But they tried to keep them apart, so they put my mother on a plane and sent her to New Zealand. And there's a picture of my mother there. That was a picture she took in the islands just before she was sent to New Zealand. She's about 20 years old here. And when my mother was sent to New Zealand, my dad's family were actually happy that she was sent over there because they wanted to keep the two families apart. But my dad, he was disobedient to his family. He jumped on a plane and followed suit. Except he thought that you could land anywhere in New Zealand, because if you were to go to the islands, you could land anywhere in Samoa, ask for a family, and they will direct you to where that family is. And so my mom's in the North Island, my dad lands in the South Island, and he doesn't realize, people are like, we don't have a clue. And so it took months for my dad to finally get to Auckland, but he landed with his cousin, who I'm named after. And they both made the trip. If they tell the story, it'll be this is a crazy story how they did this road trip over to the North Island, and they get to Ponsonby, where there's a Presbyterian church, because they heard that my mother was a Sunday school teacher at this Presbyterian church. So my dad turns up to the Presbyterian church, tells these elders that he's looking for my mother. They're all looking at them. His breath just smelled like alcohol. And so they got my mother out of the room. She comes out, sees them, and she's surprised. And they reconnected there, and they eventually get married. And my mother would learn from that marriage what my grandmother was talking about. She struggled to share her faith in this marriage, or to express her faith. My dad didn't want to go to church. He didn't like church. Had bad experience in church. He'd make a lot of mockery about God. And so my mother, she would pray 3 times a day. She would pray in the morning, and her prayer in the morning would always be about, God, bless our family. And then she'd move into, asking the Lord to guide my dad's heart into the church. And then she'd pray when everyone's at home just before dinner. She would pray again, and the center of her prayers was my father. And then at night she would be like, "Thank you, Lord, for bringing our family home, and we're all home safe. And Father, if we do not wake up tomorrow morning, remember us when you enter your kingdom." She'd pray that prayer every day. I grew up. My mother is a ferocious woman of prayer, and so she prayed, and I watched her suffer throughout her life in a marriage where she knew she couldn't express her faith. And so my dad, when I grew up, I looked up to my dad. I'm the oldest of the family. There's 3 of us. I have a younger brother. Between us is a sister. And, I struggled with my relationship with my dad because I didn't have a good relationship with my dad. I couldn't have conversations with my dad because my dad was the sort of person that would never express his feelings, nor did he ever see me as somebody that he could have a conversation with. He'll just look at me, talk to me about things he wanted me to do. And I knew that I did something right that day if my dad didn't talk to me, because the only time he spoke to me is when I messed up. And so, at the same time, I was afraid of my dad because my dad was a big guy. It's a picture of my dad that I grew up with. I was afraid of my dad. And so, my dad showed no emotions, man. He was very stoic. And so, when I would go to school, as young as like 5, 6 years old, would have like athletics day. And I remember going to athletics day, and I'll see parents talking to their children saying, hey, I love you. Hey, just do the best you can. Have a great time. And I remember sitting there looking at them going, man, that's weird. That's so weird. Like parents telling their kids they love them. After a while, I started seeing this happen a lot, but it wasn't happening with me. So then I started thinking, no, maybe I'm weird. But if something was creeping up inside of me, and that something was like, I started craving for my dad's affirmation. I was craving conversations with my dad. And so I got in trouble so many times. Anyone that knew me from high school knew that I got in trouble a lot of times. There's a pastor here, I know, Pastor Rangi. He'll tell you some stories. We both went to the same high school. And so I got in trouble many times. And this one event changed everything in my life. I was always known to pick up rubbish at lunchtime because I was always on detention. After lunch, you're supposed to get your name signed off so that you can go to class. So I'm standing there with my bucket, waiting outside the office so I can get my name signed off. I hear all this noise happening inside the office. And I happened to just pop my head. For a long time, I regretted the day I popped my head in there. I popped my head in there, and my boys, my good friends, were in an all-in brawl with the teachers. This scuffle was happening inside the office, and there's this saying among the boys, one in, all in. So I'm in. And I get myself involved in this, and then all of a sudden, we're like trying to get up, because all we hear is the cops on the way. So we're running across the oval, trying to get to where the bus stop was. And my boys were like high-fiving each other, talking about who they laid out and what they did. I'm running and I'm panicking. I'm like, man, what am I gonna say to my parents? How am I gonna explain this? And I'm thinking to myself, for sure, we're all expelled. So those of you familiar with Auckland, New Zealand, we jumped on this bus at Calston and we make our way over to Henderson. And as soon as I jumped off the bus at Henderson, I'm thinking, like, what am I gonna say? How am I gonna get out of this? My boys were just like, all good, just high-fiving each other, talking about what happened. And I'm looking around and I see this building, and it had Trisha's Academy on it. And it was a course that was available for anybody that wanted to go and study. You can study 6-month course, a 9-month course, and some of them were free. They were government funded. So I went inside and got some information, took some pamphlets, and I remember saying to myself, I got myself an idea. So I put these pamphlets in my back pocket, and I'm going home. And when I get home, my dad's not home yet, it's my mom. And so I'm about to tell my mother the biggest lie. Now, you all have to understand this. My parents, they cannot speak English. They cannot read English. They don't understand English. So I walked into the kitchen, my mother there, and I'm talking to her because she's wondering why I'm home early. And then I pulled out the pamphlets, looked at my mother, and I said, Mom, you're not gonna believe this, but I just got a scholarship to Auckland University. Handed it over to her. She grabs it, she's excited, she can't wait to tell my dad. And when my dad gets home, I'm like panicking, holding it together, hands the pamphlet over to my dad who just came home from work. He looks at it, and the best expression you'll get from my dad was like, okay. It's like, that's the best reaction you'll ever get from my dad. It's like, okay. That night, whole family's over. Everybody having dinner together, celebrating, because that's how the islanders get down. When one makes it, everybody makes it. Now, I didn't even have the opportunity to enjoy that first meal, because as we sat down at the table getting ready to say a grace and get into the meal, red and blue lights were flashing outside our window. Police officer walks in, and they talked about what happened at the school and their teachers that were assaulted, and they said, there's a warrant for the arrest of your son. And I remember looking at my mother. The look on my mother's face, I could not erase that look from my mind for a very long time. She was embarrassed. And she sat there, she just gave me this look, and I couldn't bear to look at her anymore. So I looked away and I met my dad's eyes, and my dad gave me that look like, you're dead. And I immediately stood up. The moment I saw my dad's eyes, I stood up, looked at the cops, let's go. Let's go, man. When we get downtown to where the police station was, my boys were behind bars. Every single one of them were like, man, please, I don't want to go to jail. Man, I don't want to go to jail. I'm the only one that walked in there and said, take me to jail, man. Throw the keys away. I don't want to go home. Needless to say, right, we had our court case in the morning. We were released to go home. And the beating that I got from my father that day, I cannot even describe it up here. But for the first time, my mother saw it was so bad, she wanted to intervene. And when she tried to intervene to stop it, I see this gap. It was the door, a little bit open. I took that door and I'm out. I'm running. I'm 15 years old. And I remember saying to myself, I'm never going back home. I took off and hit the streets. Ended up with my uncle, who was gang related. And when I said to my uncle was like, you can stay with me up to 2 weeks, but you're going back to your dad. And you're gonna get on your knees and you're gonna apologize, because that's just the way it is, Rome. That's just it. And I tried to explain myself to my uncle, but he was like, no, that's just how it is, Rome. You go home, you harden up, you say sorry to your father, get back into life, because there's no life for you here. You're 15 years old, don't do this. I never listened to him. For the next 2 weeks, I was sneaking behind his back doing all these things with some of the boys that were with him. Now, I wasn't proud of the things that I got involved with. But for the next 5 years of my life, I remember meeting one person who changed my life forever. I met her when I was in my 20s. Sorry, let me reverse that. I met her when I was as young as 17. And she was the sort of person to me that would talk to me about things. I could open up and share things about my life, but I couldn't tell her about other things I was involved with. So I didn't want her to like leave me. But what I loved about her is that she is one of those people that wouldn't tell you what you wanted to hear. She's those annoying people that tell you what you ought to hear. She was a best friend. We ended up seeing each other. But things changed for us when I finally hit 20. We were both 20. I still remember that conversation. She sat with me and she said to me, I just went and got a pregnancy test done and came out positive. I said to her, we're not going through with that. I'm not a good father. I won't be a good father. My dad wasn't a good dad. We're not doing this. And she was looking at me going, okay, she was a bit stunned by my response, but she said, okay, so let's just make a decision, let's go through with it. And we made a decision that we're gonna have this abortion. And we have to go through this counseling session in order for us to get the appointment over at Green Lane Hospital. The appointment was finally made at Green Lane Hospital. 10 o'clock in the morning is when this procedure was supposed to take place. I turned up there early, 9:45, with a good friend of mine. We waited there, 5 to 10, she's not there. 10 o'clock, she's not there. 10 past 10, I realize she's playing games. 10:30, I pick up the phone and I call her and I leave a very nasty message on her answer phone. And I told her that was it. If she's got to go through with this pregnancy, she's got to go through it on her own. About 7 months later, I'm watching the State of Origin, back when the New South Wales used to win a lot of games. Read the room, Rome, read the room. I'm at the edge of my seat, like with the boys as we're watching this game. And we're like getting ready to celebrate. Phone rings. While I'm at the edge of my seat, phone rings. They give me the phone and I'm like, yep. And it's her sister who calls me and says, Rome? And I'm, yep. Andrew John's on the screen. Don't you like to know you had a son today? Got off the phone, tried to watch the game, but my mind is on like, I'm a dad. At the end of the game, the boys are like having a drink up, celebrating. I tell some of the guys, hey man, I'm gonna duck out and go to White Tuckery Hospital. You guys wanna come for a ride? The boys are like, yeah, let's go. 5 of us jump in the car. We drive to White Tuckery Hospital. I looked at the driver and I said to him, hey, I'm gonna be in and out. He said, sweet. I jumped out of the car. I was not prepared for what was going to take place in that hospital. For me, I was ready to die for the boys and the stuff that we were up to. I gave my life to it. I thought that was my life purpose. And I wasn't afraid of anything. I was willing to give my life. When I walked into that hospital, something changed. I walked into that hospital, and I remember the first time I met my son. He's laying there. The first thing I remember is his fingers. He had these long fingers, and his face, like, he looked like a fully developed baby. As soon as I see his face, his eyes locked onto mine. I'm like, shoot, this baby looks like me. I grabbed this baby, had my big head, held his head up against my neck, and I could feel his warm skin on mine, and I could feel his little heartbeat and his little breath on my neck. And I looked over to his mother. She's laying there, and her hand's on the emergency button. And what was supposed to be an in and out moment ended up being a 3.5 hour moment. I'm sitting there looking at this boy, and I'm like, look at him. He looks like me. And she's like, yeah, unfortunately. As we're like looking at the boy, I'm like, hey, I want to be the first one to get his first outfit. I want to be the first one to get his first this, first that, first this. I was like so excited. And she's looking at me thinking, who are you? I put the boy down. I looked at her and I said, I'll see you tomorrow morning. You guys allowed to go? She goes, yeah, tomorrow morning. So I said, man, I'll take you guys home. She's like, okay. So then I go back outside, and as I'm walking out, it's the first love experience. The Bible says, anyone that loves, not any Christian, not any Jew, anyone that loves knows God. God is love. This is my first experience of God. I was so in love. I walked out thinking about him. Then I get to my boy's car. Windows were down. All these smoke butts were outside the window. I jumped in, and my boy looked at me in the driver's seat. He says, in and out. He reverses out of the car park, goes down Universal Drive, does this burnout down Universal Drive, and I said, oi, this road down here is 60. He slows down, and he's like looking at me like, what's going on with this guy? And he says, heck, I'll go 50. And I said, brother, you'll go 45. And then I said to him, you could kill us. Got a boy I gotta see tomorrow. I said under my breath, like, man, I gotta be alive, man. You gotta take it easy now. My life began to change, not because I wanted to, it was just happening naturally. Like there was a time when I was inside Pack and Save. This is for all the New Zealanders. I'm in Pack and Save, and I'm walking down one of the aisle with my boys. You have to understand, every second word was a curse word. That was our natural lingo. Going down one of the aisles, we were just talking. Boys are talking their natural lingo. A man and his 4 daughters walks down the same aisle, and as they're talking, every second word, curse word, I said, hey, watch your mouth. There's a man there with his daughters. Guys are like looking at me going, bro, this guy is tripping, man. He is tripping. My life was beginning to change. His first birthday, I was like, man, we're celebrating this kid's birthday. No alcohol. We're gonna be there. We're gonna make this like a Blues Clues first birthday. One of the weirdest things still in my mind, man, a whole bunch of gang members were like Blues Clues everywhere as well. And every time he couldn't sleep, I'll tell his mother, just call me, I'll come pick him up. And she knows, I'll turn up, pick him up, and he'll stop crying. I'll like hold him until he goes to sleep, and sometimes we'll sleep together on the couch. We did everything together, me and my son. So I got locked up. And when I got locked up, my mother turned up to my court cases. It used to frustrate me seeing my mother at the court cases because my mother, She'd turn up. There'll be gang members there. My mother will be there by herself, and she would pray. And the reason it would frustrate me because I felt sorry for her. She has been praying for a long time. No change has ever come. And here she is. So I was hoping to get a visitation from my son and his mother so I can explain to her, hey, listen, everything that you guys saw on the news and everything that you guys hearing about me, one thing is true. I do love you and I do love the boy. I never got an opportunity to share that story with her. She never came. The moment I got locked up, that was her opportunity to get out. She found out the truth about who I was associated with, and she used that opportunity. The moment I got locked up, she's gone. And I was depressed. My mother would turn up, and I remember looking through the glass during visitations. My mother would come, and it frustrated me, and it hurt me that she would come all that way to look at me, and sometimes she didn't have the words, but she would have these tears, and I'd say to my mother, Mom, don't come back here. Don't come back here. You make it hard for me. You don't have a son. I'm dead to you. Just move on with your life. That never stopped her. She kept on visiting me. But I told myself, I'm going to behave myself behind bars. When my time is done, I'm getting out of here. I'm finding my son. I don't know what I'm going to do in my life. Well, one thing I do know for sure is I'm going to be a good father. The time came, I got out, and I was about to head in a different direction. The boys turned up and said, hey, we got to go back to the pad because everybody is celebrating you out. So we get there, and I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you just didn't feel like you were there anymore. They were celebrating, drinking, and partying. I'm sitting there, and I'm like zoned out. And as soon as I saw them getting intoxicated, I jumped in the car, and I drove to where my son and his mother was living. When I got there, the people there said, no, she don't live here no more. I went to her family house, her sister, cousin, friends, the whole night, going from one house to another. And the more they were saying no, the more I was just plunging into depression because even if I didn't have a relationship with her, I still want a relationship with my son. And so I was like so depressed. So many things I was doing during that time just wasn't me anymore. I remember when my uncle found out, he asked for me to come and see him. And so I did. I went out to see my uncle. And he was asking me what was going on with me. I had two options. I could tell him the truth, suffer the consequences, or I could just tell him a lie and just continue living the way I was living. I decided, tell the truth, suffer the consequences. Now I told him I wasn't cut out for this anymore. I just want to find my son and move on with life. And I remember him saying to me, I want some things back. Listed all these things he wanted back to his house. And then after that, he said, I don't ever want to see your face again. That's the nice way of putting it. I had all that stuff dropped off to his house, early hours of the morning. Then I went to a payphone, called my mother. And I said to my mom, where's my brother? I want out. My mother tells me something. My brother followed my footsteps, ended up leaving home as well. My dad was the sort of man that was, if I ever see these boys again, I will end them myself. He's not the prodigal son father, where the son is running towards them and the father runs towards the son and then they greet. My father would run towards us just to kill us. And so we never wanted to go home again. But my father always blamed it on me that my brother followed my footsteps. He never came to any of our court cases. One day, my dad is on his way home from work and his car breaks down. He has two items in his car. He has a beer crate and a 20 kg sack of potatoes. He can only take one of those items to the nearest bus stop in Onehunga. Where he was in his life at the time, he took the beer crate. Took the beer crate over to this busy bus stop in Onehunga, sat on it, and waited for the bus to turn up. We were living in West Auckland. When the bus turns up, he had been sitting there already 20 minutes, listening from behind him, a community hall where singing, praise and worship was happening in his language. And an evangelist from America, speaking in his language, started preaching. And I could just imagine my dad when the sound of music came, right? He was probably cringing, wanting the bus to turn up soon. 20 minutes into the sermon, my dad's sitting on that beer crate, and people start jumping on the bus, except my dad. Bus left, my dad stayed there. Listening. Soon as the sermon finished, he jumped on the next bus. Went home, something happened. Took those beers, put them in the fridge, found out that, this is an evangelistic series that's going on. It's going on for 3 weeks. So he goes to his workplace, and he's working the following day, and his boss says, I heard your car broke down. I can drop you off home when work is done. He says, no, I'm fine. I'll catch the bus. Goes back to the bus stop. He's there for 3 weeks listening to this sermon. And the moment the evangelist makes an appeal, my dad is at the building looking for the entrance. And evangelist is up here preaching. My dad walks in and up the front. There were people in the building that knew them, knew what his life was like. And here's my dad with his arms wide open. He goes home that night late. An elder drops him off late. My mother doesn't know where he's been. He didn't tell nobody where he was. In fact, my mother thought that he was seeing another woman until he turns up, walks inside the house that night, opens up the fridge, takes out those beers that he put in there 3 weeks earlier, opened them up and started pouring down the sink. My mother comes out and does the same thing. Both of them having this moment where they're pouring beers down the sink. My dad looks at my mother and says, I love you. My dad, my mother, the church turned up to my brother's court case. And my brother tells the story. He's like standing there in his trial, and in comes my mother. Behind her was my dad and the church. My brother says, you should have seen them, man. They were like gangsters. These church members, man, they walked in there like Jehoshaphat. My brother's like, you should hear my brother tell the story. Man, Jehoshaphat, man, that king that would never sing praises after the battle. He'd sing before the battle because he knew the battle would be won. His church came in, sat down. My dad was there at the court case. And my brother says, in the middle of the trial, my dad stands up, and the magistrate could have easily said, stop. But she doesn't. She actually asked for a translator to come in. So one of the guards came in and translated for my dad. And my dad said this, my son's failure is not his alone. I'm not asking you to give this boy a second chance. I'm asking you to give a father a second chance. The magistrate couldn't contain it. So she took her glasses off and she says, we're going to have to come back next week. Because I truly believe if we're going to fix this city, it's going to begin at home. They meet the following week. But before that happens, my mother shouts out to my brother. Says, Dalla, pray at 10 o'clock in the morning and pray at 10 o'clock at night. Your father, the church, is praying for you 10 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock at night. My brother's getting taken back to the cell. He's like, to this day, I wish I was a fly on the wall to see my brother's first prayer. The following week, my brother was released with bail conditions. And what he was praying about behind bars, he says, Lord, you get me out of this, I'm following you. You get me out of this, I'm following you. And the moment the Lord set him free, he left New Zealand, went to Australia with his family, got married, had 2 kids. So my mother says, your brother's not here, to me over the phone. I said, where is he? She says, I'm going to give you the address. Now here's me. Never left New Zealand. Grew up in Auckland. I'm familiar with Melbourne, familiar with Sydney, familiar with Brisbane, and familiar with Perth. I said, where's my brother? She says, he's in Kurrambong. Curran what? She says he's in Kruenbong. Give him a call. So I called my brother. He didn't believe me for a second that I was going to come see him. He says, listen, I'm at Freeman's Drive, Kruenbong. You're a big boy. You'll find it. Wrote the address down, and I had this mission. Leave Auckland, find Kruenbong. I finally get my ticket. I turn up to the airport, but I felt like I was a drug dealer because I felt like somebody was going to turn up to the airport and say, where do you think you're going? So when I was at the airport, I was panicking for the whole night I was panicking. Following day, I was still panicking. I turn up to the airport and I'm at the counter, the checkout, and I'm like, yeah, my name is Rome, Ulia, Loma. They're like looking at, oh yeah, here's your ticket. All I had was a backpack. So I go to the gate and I'm like, come on, open up the door. And I'm sitting there and I'm imagining somebody just like walking in and saying, you there, come with me. So I'm like sitting there going, oh man, I'm still panicking. And as soon as the gate opens up, I'm like standing up and I'm like, oh man, I'm going through. I get on the plane, I sit down, put the seatbelt on, I'm like, hurry up and take off. Just take off. As soon as the plane takes off, it's my first time on a plane. Plane takes off, and I'm looking down at that last piece of Aotearoa leaving my window, and I saluted New Zealand going, goodbye, New Zealand, I'm never coming back. Plane lands in Sydney, I get arrested. I'm in this room. They took my passport. They say they're sending me back home. And I'm sitting there, all sorts of things are going in my head, and I'm going, you know what? What am I doing, man? The audacity to think that you can change. I'm going back home. I don't know whose voice it was, but it was in my head saying, you're going back home. And I'm saying to myself, you know what? I'm going back home. And if you thought I was bad then, watch when I get back there. Waiting there for them to turn up to finish their phone call with Wellington. Customer officer comes in, opens up the door, grabs my back and passport. He goes, you can go. I'm looking at him. And I asked no questions. Didn't even say thank you. Grabbed my bag, passport, I walked. Jumped on the first train. I don't know where it was going. Got off at the first stop. Took that first gasp of air. I was like, looked over to a booth, pulled out that piece of paper, and I said, I'm looking for Freeman's Drive, Kruenbong. They told me how to get there. It's about 2.5 hours away. I was like, what, 2.5 hours? You drive more than an hour out of anywhere, any direction in Auckland, you out of Auckland. I'm on a train, couldn't sleep. I'm like watching every sign, waiting for that sign, Morissette. As soon as I get to Morissette, I don't know where I am. I don't know its history. I know nothing about it. Now, for those of you who are familiar with Morissette right now, you're the spoiled ones with the KFC over there and the McDonald's. They had none of that when I got there. The only place that was flashing with lights at the time was Bilo. And I remember, I grew up in the city, man. I grew up in the city. I'm an urban boy. I jumped off that train and I took one look and I said, what is this place? It's like some kind of country town from the 1900s or something. But I couldn't believe my brother was there. So I was thinking, man, I hope I got the right address. So I walked, man. I walked from Morissette to Kruenbong. There's my brother's house, right? In the corner street of Freeman's Drive, the Memorial Church on the other side, shops on that side. My brother's house is right in the corner. And I remember standing outside looking at that house going, all right, 4:30 in the morning. Walked up, knocked on the door opens. It's my brother's wife and her 2 kids around her legs. She's looking at me, she's like, I'm hugging her. Behind her is my brother. He's like standing behind her, he's like, so they let you in the country. And I looked at my brother and I said, they let you in the country. Man, I couldn't sleep the next few days, next few weeks. So many things were going on in my head, I couldn't sleep. I was drinking myself to sleep because I couldn't sleep. I was depressed. I was like in dark places. And my brother was concerned about me. He's like, dude, you should go and get work, man. Replace alcohol with work. I know you just want to be busy. So I did. I was doing scaffolding, I was doing security work, and I was also laboring.